Welcome back to season 2 of the Tobacco Business Cell podcast with Damien and Sam. We are up to episode 5, and today we're just going to share some stories of actual transactions that Damien and I have been involved in. So these are real case scenarios. Some have gone very smoothly, some haven't, but all of them we've got the job done. So we just wanted to sort of share what really happens in these transactions and what's worked and what hasn't. And as I always say to all my vendors and all my buyers, there is always a spanner in a contract, in a transaction, in a sale. Could be small, it could be huge, but always be prepared that nothing will ever be 100% smooth sailing.
And it could be early or it could be late.
Yes, exactly. So, Damon, I think you're going to start off with one of your stories. Go for it.
Look, I will. And look, this is a lovely retail business of some size. It's not small. It was a referral to us from an accounting firm. And so we met with the owners. The owners are very reliant on the accounting firm. They trust them implicitly, which is absolutely great. So we completed an appraisal. We got to meet and understand the business. And so we did an appraisal of value and presented that to both the vendors and the accountant. Look, they were pretty happy with where it sat, and it largely reconciled with what the accounting firm thought, which was nice. However, the first spanner, then the vendor decided that they'd maybe try and talk to some of the staff about. There was one particular staff member who had expressed some interest, and this was one of those sales where it was quite open. The vendor was very open with their staff, so Tobacco had to then sit back, which was fine, So we sat back and waited for that process to unfold, and that took probably 2 months, and then ultimately. And the deal that was put on the table was quite compelling for the staff member, but ultimately they chose not to move forward. And we do find this happens more often than not. Some staff members are not business owners. They just want to get the paycheck every fortnight or every week, and that's fine. There's no disrespect in that. So after that slightly false start, bang, we signed them up as a listing and we went to market. But actually, we didn't go to market. I had a buyer. We'd had a deal that had fallen over several months previously, in fact, probably several weeks previously, through no fault of Tobacco or the buyer. To be fair, the business just had traded. It had been trading poorly, unbeknownst to us. There was a technical reason for that around the accounting system, which I won't bore you with. But long story short, we knew the buyer. We'd met him initially for a coffee just to talk about what they wanted and what they were looking for. We then had him front and center on a business. That didn't work. I then went straight back to this buyer and said, look, we haven't even gone to market with this. I think it's got a profile that really suits you. So the buyer came in. We met with the owners at the accounting firm and the lead accountant. That all went very, very well. And long story short, we presented an offer that was pretty much fully priced, and that both the buyer and the vendors were very, very happy with. So that sort of, from the buyer being introed to a contract on the table, was a very quick process. Due diligence has taken somewhat longer, mostly because there's just a particular issue around some compliance and of some works that leasehold improvements to the premises. But look, the DD has progressed well. There's only one issue. Both parties have agreed the way forward with that issue. There's going to be a bit of work done. There's going to be compliance then gained, and that will enable the lease to be reassigned and the finance to be confirmed. So the buyer is even now working in the business day to day, but they're not getting paid, but they're learning about the business under the current ownership. And so when they hit the ground running, when it settles, they'll it'll be a seamless transition, if you like. So I guess the takeouts for me from that one, just we know our buyers, and if we can do an off-market sale, and this was, then we will try to do that, and it is to everyone's benefit.
Absolutely. I guess the two transactions I'd like to talk about are they're not really opposing, but it just can go to show, I guess, the difference in how transactions can sometimes transpire. The first is a landscaping business where I started talking to the vendor years ago, and his accountant is someone I know very well. So I sort of had many coffees with him, and it was a new landscaping business, but the vendor was quite heavy into rugby, ex-professional rugby player. He was starting to dip his toes into coaching, so he knew at some stage he was going to need to give up the business. So very rightly, he got on to me early and he said, let's have a coffee. This is my plan. He kind of engaged me without engaging me, if that makes sense. Just used my experience, used my knowledge, and I was happy to share with him and working with the accountant over time. The answer for me was always the same to him. Great, it's fantastic. What you need to do is lock in some contracts with some of these larger builders, but also the longer you're in business, the more saleable your business will be. If you can hold out another year and show another year of good trading, you got a foreman in there, so he was hands off, the better, because it was a new business, and new businesses are very hard to sell, especially if it's a landscaper. He did all the right things. He got some large home builders. He got contracts locked in. He got himself off the tools. He actually did start coaching a wee bit more, so he got the foreman doing everything. But I kept saying to him, if you can wait 6 more months, it's just going to be better. We just need to show that profit can continue, those contracts can continue. His accountant agreed. We kept doing this. We went through the same process, caught up with him, great guy. And then finally he said, I just have to now commit full time to coaching. I have to sell it now. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Obviously, rugby coaching, fantastic. So we had everything ready to go. Got a listing agreement in place. 2 weeks later, we went to market. 2 weeks after that, we had a multi-offer, and the business sold for, I think, $5,000 over asking price. Wasn't a large business. 2 weeks after that, the business actually settled. So the whole thing actually was wrapped up within a month. Dream result for the vendor. He's now committed full-time to his rugby coaching. So that was transaction number one. The second one was a little bit different, and it dragged on for a little bit longer. Bigger business in the service industry. This was last year. The vendors were adamant they wanted to push it out in December. And normally we would say maybe not in December. Everybody sort of school's finishing mid-December. People are going on holiday. I quite often like to think after Waitangi is a very good time to push it out, because that breaks over, all the professionals are back. But we did push it out mid-December. Great business. And we found, as Damien's alluded to in previous podcasts, we found that one buyer who was moving from Auckland, who was dead keen. I ended up writing an offer for the business on Christmas Eve from the beaches of Rarotonga. The Wi-Fi wasn't too good, but we got there. So we actually got the business under offer and got it exclusive with the buyer pre-Christmas. Now, that business didn't actually confirm the sale until after, the end of April. There was some really key customers within the business, and we knew that they were very, very key, but there were some contracts in there that I actually didn't know existed. And when we found out there were those contracts in place, they needed to be reassigned. It caused a few issues with the buyer, who got a little bit concerned, and so did his lawyers, and were insisting on new contracts being written. And then we had a very large listed company as the customer. They refused to do new contracts. They needed to be reassigned. Long story short, it just caused a few issues between both parties. Now, I would say there were 3 or 4 times where the vendor said, that's enough, I'm just not going to sell it, I'm just going to keep it. I knew that they wanted to move on and do other things. I knew they wanted to sell it. So having us in place as a broker, there were a lot of phone calls, there were a lot of mediation, there were a lot of meetings, there was a lot of emotion. We actually managed to keep the fires burning, and we got the business sold and confirmed in April, and now everything is going gangbusters. There were so many times where the deal was off. It was it sort of just kept on going. The confirmation date kept being pushed out. I was meant to confirm in February, then it was March, and it was April. We were thinking, is this business ever actually going to sell? And it did. And look, the vendors are very happy. They've actually moved on and purchased another business because that's what they wanted to do. Everybody's happy. That's so different than the landscaping business I talked about, which just happened like that, no drama. There always is a drama, and there were some small, some big. In this case, it was quite large. It was an issue, but we actually got through it, and everybody's happy.
Sam, I think the lesson from that second, from both of them really, the first one, really, really good preparation,
yes.
and you were heavily engaged with their business accountant. There was a lot of trust right through. With the second one, it was more, I think, your maturity. You're 8 or 9 years into this now, and I know some of those hurdles that you had to overcome. It reminded me of a similar one maybe 18 months ago that you managed to get over the line when you were holed up with a busted leg.
Yes.
Similar volatile, perhaps vendor. And you've just got to let them vent, and you've just got to bring them back and refocus on what's the end game here.
Yeah.
And I know that you've done that extremely well with
Mm.
both of those parties.
You sometimes get, in two instances, I've had texts from vendors going, deal's dead. Literally, I've still got the texts. I had one that was a $4.5 million transaction. That was the one. And literally the text was, the deal's dead. I'm done. And I wrote back and go, no, it's not, mate. Let's just have a chat. I'm sure we can work through this. And we do. And they sell it. And I keep in contact with them. And they're very, very happy. So if I had just said, okay, cool, and left it,
Yep.
everybody would have missed out, including the buyer. So,
And there is always a spanner, as you say. Now, look, that's really good insights. Thank you, Sam, to the value add that a broker brings to the transaction, not just through technical knowledge, but also empathy and just, I guess, stepping both buyer and vendor through different processes and getting their understanding around things. I think the final example that I can give, and again, it's a this year example. I had a vendor, he had been a buyer on our database. He had then purchased a business, not through TBS. He wasn't in Canterbury, he was up top of the south. But he approached us to sell his business in January of this year. And he said, look, I'm just reaching out. I want to know what it's worth. It could be a 2-year process, and I'm all happy with that. That's fine. So we had a Microsoft Teams meeting because he was top of the south. And so I learned about the business, spent a couple of hours with him over several weeks, completed the appraisal, and sent that through to him. And he pretty much accepted that. He said, yeah, that kind of resonates with where my accountant thinks it would sit value-wise. So that's great. So he signed up. We got the information memorandum complete, and we went to market. And by the time we'd got all the information from him and some year-end accounts and bits and bobs, it was late May. It was late April. So that's great. So we go to market, and it's a service-based business. Within 2 weeks, we have a multi-offer with 4 parties. He couldn't believe it. My vendor was absolutely, I won't say overwhelmed. He's a very sensible, measured character, but he was like, goodness me. And that just means, again, with all the preparation we'd done, when we hit the market, we hit the ground running and we could answer all the questions and we had all of the information. So long story short, we had Microsoft Teams calls with each of the buyers. A decision was made as to which one to go with, and it was actually over the asking price because this particular buyer was very, very keen. So that decision was made to go with buyer A. I then really, really tried very hard with the other, we were down to 3 buyers at that stage. With the other 2 buyers, I said, look, don't be discouraged. Again, we've seen multi-offers. We've seen them not go through for whatever reason. And it's a very good job that I did that, because within 48 hours, the first guy bailed. And he would have been a first-time buyer. I think there was an element of, oh, crikey, this is real now. And there was an element of, yep, he'd pushed the value a bit high and funding potentially became an issue. So we very quickly pivoted and we got the next guy under offer. And I say that as a very simple little sentence, but it does take a little while. And it's kind of like, you know what? It's really important that you keep the buyers on side with a multi. And we were able to do that. So as it's evolved, the second choice, and this is so often the case, is actually the best person for this business. And through the due diligence process, it's worked very, very well. DD has taken somewhat more time. It's the type of business which, and I won't identify it, but it has to be a share sale. So with share sales, the individual is buying the company as opposed to buying the business. And I won't get into the differentiations, but ultimately with share sales, the contract, the sale and purchase agreement is done by solicitors and has to be agreed between solicitors. There's potentially more at risk for the buyer because they're buying the shares in the business. And there's also got to be an agreement between the 2 accountants on balance sheet variables, because ultimately they are just taking over the balance sheet of the existing
the bank accounts and the liabilities and everything. So
that's right.
So complicated.
A bit more complicated. And with this particular business, there were regulatory reasons why it had to be a share sale. So The upside for the broker, frankly, is that there's a lot more work done by the accountants and the lawyers than perhaps we might normally get involved with. But look, it's come through that process really well. The business sale has confirmed it's settled in this month, and both parties are extremely happy. And I think that the lessons from that really are probably the multi-office scenario. You've just got to really be very, very empathetic and understanding, and just make sure that the parties that aren't selected don't throw their toys. And it's just, there's a bit of maturity in that and understanding people. And I think the other one is just the preparation that had gone in from when we hit the ground running. We were under contract within literally a couple of weeks. And my buyer had said, hey, this might take 2 years and I'm okay. Sorry, my vendor. So he's very happy. We're very happy. There was certainly a spanner or two in this one as well, but we got there in the end. And I think Sam, I think the key takeaway from every deal that we do is it is a continuum. It's a process. We talked in episode 2 about, there's a number of quite defined and distinct steps in the sale process. And as long as you've got an experienced broker who is comfortable and understands these distinct steps and ways to, I guess, overcome any missteps or any spanners that might crop up, that's really critical. And fortunately, we get 8 out of 10 sold that we take on board. We're in a position where, by and large, we've seen some of these missteps before. Sometimes they're new, and we're learning all the time. And
I think that's where we show a lot of our value add is that's proven in preparation and in your last example, but B, it's in that negotiation, and it's overcoming those spanners with our experience and with having dealt with most situations. What I like to say is we keep that deal stitched together. If it looks like it's about to pull apart, a broker is that person that comes in there and just keeps it stitching together, because we know that most challenges can be overcome if we have a buyer and a vendor. They get on well.
Yep.
They're excited. There's always going to be hurdles. It's just about how you plan to overcome it. And quite often, if they can get through these scenarios, it means they're going to have a great relationship post-settlement as well. I mean, the business is going to carry on going gangbusters. So it's really critical, we feel, and we would say this, of course, but that vendors do need a broker through those stages, not just to find a buyer and say, there you go, good luck, but we need to be there every step of the way as a sounding board, as a mediator, as a counselor, as a negotiator. We need to be there to just ensure that things are sort of keep working in motion.
I think in closing, it's fair to say that sometimes even professional advisors, be they accountants or solicitors, may take positions on certain things that really are not necessarily focused on getting a deal over the line.
Correct.
Focused more on either self-preservation for that advisor, or, hey, I'm here to protect my client, and they adopt a win-lose scenario as opposed to a win-win scenario.
Yeah.
So we do find ourselves from time to time pushing back at either of those advisors and saying, hey, come on, this is not how business is done.
Yeah.
And, occasionally we do miss out. We had one where there was just some unfortunate legal advice that tipped the deal over, and we decided we couldn't work with the vendor any longer, and such is life. But as I say, 8 out of 10, we get the job done, and it's good fun.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's us.
Yes, and we have our 1 episode left coming up. We'll see you shortly.